welcome back. So glad you're here. This video is continuing a video series on aesthetic relativism. And in the previous video, I gave an overview of why someone might believe in aesthetic relativism. And I tried to show that there's two broad argument types for aesthetic relativism. An argument from the subjectivity of aesthetic properties. It's kind of an anti-realist view about aesthetic qualities. And then an argument from aesthetic diversity. So this video is going to take that first argument type and show that it fails. This is just one more attempt to show that a certain form of relativism is a bad idea. So the argument from the subjectivity of aesthetic properties, one way to get at this is to look at the first chapter of C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. Great little book. If you haven't read it, just stop watching YouTube videos and go read it. Go watch it on a YouTube video. You can probably find it somewhere out there. In Lewis's first chapter in The Abolition of Man, he provides a nice, short, and accessible summary of both a statement and brief refutation of the argument from subjectivity for the relativity of aesthetic properties. In this chapter of his book, Lewis wants to show that both aesthetic and ethical relativism are problematic. They fail. He begins with a discussion of aesthetic relativism, in which he presents a relativistic argument for aesthetic relativism, and then provides a refutation of the argument. Let me read a rather lengthy quotation of this. So first, here's the statement of aesthetic relativism, here's the statement of the relativistic argument, which includes aesthetic relativism from the subjectivity of aesthetic properties. Okay. This is quoting Lewis's Abolition. Quote, in their second chapter, Gaius and Titius, these are two pseudonyms for real authors who've written a high school English grammar textbook. Gaius and Titius quote the well-known story of Coleridge at the waterfall. You remember there were two tourists present, the one who called the waterfall sublime, and the other one who called it pretty. And that Coleridge mentally endorsed the first judgment and rejected the second with disgust. Now, Gaius and Titius comment as follows. When the man said, "This is sublime," he appeared to be making a remark about the waterfall. Actually, according to Gaius and Titius, he was not making a remark about the waterfall, but a remark about his own feelings. What he was saying really was, I have feelings associated in my mind with the word sublime, or shortly, I have sublime feelings. Here are a good many deep questions settled in pretty summary fashion. The authors are not finished. They add, this confusion is continually present in language as we use it. We appear to be saying something very important about something. Actually, we are only saying something about our feelings. That's from, end quote, that's from Lewis's Abolition of Man. So let's formalize this little argument for aesthetic relativism as follows. I'm going to use some abbreviations here. This might be a little hard to follow on video rather than in print, but here it is. Let S stand for an individual subject. Let A stand for an aesthetic property. Let O stand for an object of experience, and F stand for a feeling of a property. Okay. So the argument goes like this. S, an individual subject, has a visual experience O of an object of experience that produces F, a feeling of a property of P, so of some property P, in S, in an individual subject. Therefore, A is nothing more than F. That is, the aesthetic property is nothing more than the feeling of the property. Now, this isn't a very good argument. Logically good, that is. From the fact that S experiences O and has a feeling of P, why should we think that P is nothing other than F in S? That's the question. Now, David Hume, might use him to rescue this position, offers a better argument for this position in his little essay called On the Standard of Taste. It's always rough when you got to rely on Hume for something. Now, Hume's argument takes the form of a reductio. Reductio ad absurdum. Now, these kinds of arguments are always nice because they really try and show, take a position and then reduce it to absurdity and then try and show the application of this. So here's how Hume's argument goes. But before coming to the argument, Hume is careful to distinguish between what he calls judgment and sentiment. On the one hand, human beings make judgments which come from the understanding, i.e. the logical operations of reason on the mind. But not all judgments that people have are correct. Some judgments are true, others are false. So according to Hume, this is because judgments refer to something beyond themselves, which Hume calls matters of fact. When judgments differ between people, there's one, and but one, that is just and true. When it comes to judgments for Hume, logical or mathematical relations or scientific empirical observations would fit this category for Hume. Okay, so Hume thinks that he's not a God bless his soul. He is not maybe that's not possible. At this point, it might be too late for him. For judgments, Hume's an objectivist of sorts. Okay, but on the other hand, sentiments, they're always right, quote unquote right. Sentiments refer to nothing beyond themselves. Here's what Hume states about sentiments. Quote, 1,000 different sentiments excited by the same object, they're all right. Because no sentiment represents what is really in the object. I don't know. This is hard to not read without laughing. Okay. It only marks a certain conformity or relation between the object and the organs or faculties of the mind, and if that conformity did not exist, sentiment could never possibly have being. End quote. Okay, so now we got Hume's distinction between sentiments and matters of fact. And here's a way we can construct now a Humean continuation of Gaius and Titius's initial argument. Isn't philosophy fun? Here it goes. Here's Hume's reconstructed argument. 1. Objects that taste sweet are sweet, i.e. the property of being sweet, having the property of being sweet in them. 2. According to the dispositions of the organs, for example, the tongue, the same object may be both sweet and bitter. 3. No object can have contradictory properties simultaneously, e.g. sweet and not sweet. 4. Therefore, objects don't have properties of taste in them. You got properties now eliminated. 5. Therefore, 1 is false. 1 was objects that taste sweet are sweet, so that's false. 6. Aesthetic responses of beauty occurring in the mind are analogous to taste responses occurring in the tongue. 7. No object can have contradictory properties simultaneously, beauty and not beauty. 8. Therefore, objects don't have beauty in them. Wow, that's a nice little argument. So this reconstructed argument seems to capture the general sentiment, pun intended, of Gaius and Titius, the authors Lewis is arguing against in the Abolition. This position rejects the objectivity of beauty in that it claims that there aren't properties of being beautiful or being ugly that are actually in objects. Rather, these are properties, or relations maybe, that obtain between perceivers and things perceived. This position, the denial of aesthetic properties being in objects, need not lead to relativism, where relativism is here understood as the idea that all works of art or natural objects can be equally beautiful, just in case they are believed to be beautiful by persons who perceive them. Hume is very careful to deny this relativistic position. Okay, so far so good. So Hume denies that aesthetic standards, though, are fixed by our reasonings a priori. There aren't transcendental, non-human, nature-based standards for evaluating objects for their aesthetic qualities. Hume does claim that experience tells us nearly universally what pleases us aesthetically, and this is based on the observation of the common sentiments of human nature. For Hume, great, beautiful works of art are quote, naturally fitted to excite agreeable sentiments. Why doesn't everybody like Metallica? They immediately display their energy, and while the world endures, they maintain their authority over the minds of men. End quote. Adding further, quote, though it be certain that beauty and deformity more than sweet and bitter are not qualities in objects, but belong entirely to the sentiment, internal or external, it must be allowed that there are certain qualities in objects which are fitted by nature to produce these particular feelings. That's nice to know. Scottish works only, maybe. Hume does maintain that we can know beautiful and ugly things through practice and training of our aesthetic sense organs. Lastly, he's very careful to deny any sort of simplistic relativism. He states, quote, it is sufficient for our present purpose if we have proved that the taste of all individuals is not on equal footing. End quote. Okay, so that's good to know. Anybody that disagrees with you on different footing. So the trouble, it seems to me, with Hume's argument is that if aesthetic properties aren't really in objects, but are merely in the individual's sentiments, which are parts of one's constituent human nature, and if there are general standards that point to the idea that not all tastes are on equal footing, then one must show how it is not that all tastes are on equal footing, contrary to the relativistic view that denies this. So Hume has a general argument that not all tastes are on equal footing, an argument that relies on near universal approbation of certain literary works, tests of time, endurance, etc. However, if a relativist claims that this argument, which certainly isn't entirely a priori, does not produce in her or him the taste of approbation, what is Hume to do? He can appeal to common acceptance of such argument, but he cannot logically show that disagreement with his own position, if it is one based on taste, is inferior to his own. Thus, the shift from a denial of the objectivity of aesthetic properties leads subtly to relativism about those properties. So let's return now to Lewis's rejoinder to the objections to the objectivity of beauty raised by Gaius and Titius. Lewis says that there are two reasons we should reject Gaius and Titius's view. First, even if aesthetic properties aren't in objects, but are mere mental projections or Humean sentiments, the properties projected have to be different from the feelings that I have about the object. Second, identifying aesthetic properties with personal feelings leads to absurdities. Here's a long quotation from Lewis to see this point. Before considering this Lewis now, from Lewis's Abolition, before considering the issues really raised by this momentous little paragraph, designed, if you remember, for the upper forms of schools, like high school students, we must eliminate one more confusion into which Gaius and Titius have fallen. Even on their own view, any conceivable view, the man who says this is sublime cannot mean I have sublime feelings. Even if it were granted that such qualities of sublimity were simply and solely projected into things from our emotions, so you grant Hume's sentimentalism, the emotions which prompt the projections are the correlatives, and therefore almost the opposites of the qualities projected. Feelings which make a man call the object sublime are not sublime feelings, but feelings of veneration. If this is sublime is to be reduced at all to a statement about the speaker's feelings, the proper translation would be, I have humble feelings. In other words, it's like looking up the Milky Way and saying, wow, that's just vast and awesome. It doesn't mean I'm vast and awesome. I'm feeling rather small and insignificant. So if this is sublime is reduced to the speaker's feelings, it would be, I have humble feelings. If the view held by Gaius and Titius were consistently applied, it would lead to obvious absurdities. Force them to maintain that you are contemptible means I have contemptible feelings. In fact, your feelings are contemptible means my feelings are contemptible. And that's absurd. That's, again, end quote from Lewis. The main point of Lewis's first argument is that even if we grant, which Lewis himself does not, that aesthetic properties are nothing more than feelings or sentiments, our feelings are not the same as the properties we project onto objects. For example, if I'm standing in the desert on a dark cloudless sky and with excellent visibility and I see the Milky Way and all the constellations above me and I declare, this is awesome, I'm not feeling awesome or vast or infinite. I'm feeling rather small, insignificant, and finite. The emotions we have are not the same as the properties we project onto objects, if, in fact, aesthetic properties are nothing more than projections of our sentimental faculties. The main point of Lewis's second argument is that the reduction of aesthetic properties to feelings leads to absurdities. For example, if I say, you're ugly, that means I have ugly feelings, which implies that somehow I'm ugly. When I say you're ugly, I certainly don't mean to assert that I'm ugly too, although I very well may be. Say something about that in the comments. These considerations should be enough to militate against the idea that aesthetic properties can easily be reduced to emotional states on the grounds that this idea has serious logical difficulties. Okay, so that's the end of our first discussion of the argument against, the argument for aesthetic relativism based on the subjectivity of aesthetic properties. We tried to show that neither Hume's argument nor Gaius and Titius' argument succeeds, and that implies that one main argument for aesthetic relativism fails. All right, so next video we'll take a look at another argument for aesthetic relativism, calling this an argument from aesthetic diversity. All right, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.
Stay psyched, Grom.